Tonight we continue our pre-election segments by turning to the race for City Councilor At-Large. Our guest is one of the finalists in the election taking place Tuesday, November 5th. We'd like to welcome Alejandra St. Guillen. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
One of the things I've noticed recently, Alejandra, is that you have put out a video that talks about a very painful experience for you, which is the loss of your sister who was killed in a murder in New York City. What did you learn from that about the need for trauma services?
Yeah, and I've talked about it on the campaign trail somewhat, but I really felt it was the time to put it front and center, and the need for trauma-informed services. Having gone through trauma myself and having had the services I needed to work through it, and it's an ongoing process, it really taught me a lot about how trauma impacts you physically, how it impacts you mentally. And so you think about in our schools, how is trauma impacting our students, whether they are experiencing housing instability, whether they've lost a parent to deportation or to the criminal justice system, whether they are dealing with substance abuse or sexual abuse at home. There's so many things that our students go through that unless we are really treating them through trauma-informed services, we're leaving out a huge part of how they're going to be educated. And I think expanding that to our community centers, which sees thousands of kids every year, also is another opportunity. It's just really, I think it's really important. It's something that doctors and pediatricians have talked about for a long time, but I think it's something we really need to marriage with other services.
The city does have these trauma response teams, and
yes.
I think there are things going on in the Boston Public Schools.
Yeah.
But what's the missing piece exactly?
Yeah, no, and I think that, and you're absolutely right. It's not the idea that there isn't anything going on. I think it's just being more in depth, and one thing that's been great is the passage of all nurses in every school. I think that's hugely important. I think social workers in every school is hugely important, because one thing is also to recognize the signs of trauma as well. And so I think it's more of an expansion of all the services that exist that I'm really talking about.
You're running as an LGBT candidate, just because that's what you are. But on
Yes.
the other hand, if you go back in time, that was more remarkable and more difficult. What was that like for you coming out?
Yeah, I mean, I released last week was National Coming Out Day, and I released my own coming out story, and what I talked about was the fact that my own personal story was actually a pretty, in terms of my inner circle, in terms of my family and my inner circle, a very positive one. And but I know that that's not the experience of everyone. I also know that the issues impacting particularly LGBTQ youth of color, particularly trans youth of color, they're overrepresented in the homelessness population, in bullying, in untreated mental health services. And so, when we talk about LGBTQ, yes, it's important to celebrate gay marriage. It's really important to celebrate the trans bill, but we have to understand that there are a myriad of issues that young people, connected with their LGBT, connected with them being people of color, connected with them being poor, that are really impacting them and overly impacting them.
Another thing I almost forgot about your background. I know you were from Mission Hill, and you went to Boston Latin School.
Did.
You went to an elite college, and then you became a teacher in the South Bronx. How did that change you?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I had always been very interested in education. I did city year between my freshman and sophomore year of college, and I worked at the Condon School in South Boston. And but really, that being one of my first jobs out of college, to really see how much you have to give as a teacher, and how important it is that you're there for those students every single day, and how hard that is. My respect for teachers is huge, because I know the work that goes into teaching. You also see all the systemic inequalities and how that impacts the students and their learning, their ability to learn. I had students, we were in an area that was very transient, people, again, experiencing housing instability, in and out of shelters. So really going to multiple schools in one year. And so it really was important look at how many challenges we have in our urban system and how important it is that we have all the resources that we need in our schools to make sure that we're filling the needs of all of the students, not just their curriculum needs.
There are students in other schools in Boston. The Globe did a wonderful story about them, students with a lot of potential who were falling off track. They just didn't see themselves going anywhere. What would you do for those students?
So I think so that's a great question. So one thing, I've been a huge I've talked a lot about admissions into the exam schools, but even if that process is reformed, you still have 75% of our students who are not going to go to exam schools. And so we need to have quality high schools across the board. I think one thing that we can do almost immediately is really reform our voc ed school, our Madison Park, maybe add another school. We are the center of technology, healthcare, and we have the student population, we have the jobs. We need to be making a greater connection. The trades, the building trades. I mean, we're in a building boom right now. I just feel like if there's any time any time to really dig deep and create a state-of-the-art voc ed technical school, it would be now, because we have the resources are there, the social capital is there, the actual capital is there, and so I think the students who are at Madison Park need to feel like they have a future and that they're working towards a goal that anyone else in any other school would be able to work towards.
Now, there is another finalist who thinks that we should also have at least a partially, if not fully, elected school committee. Should there be at least something in that direction?
I think so. What I've said is that I would support an elected school committee. I would support a hybrid model, half elected, half appointed. I would also support a model that's appointed by different factions. So maybe some from the mayor's office, some from city councilors, some from students, and making sure that student on the committee has a vote, because right now that they don't. One elected from parents or appointed from parents, and maybe another one from teachers and staff. I just think that there's a way to make it so that the school committee is more accountable to a wider group of people, whereas right now just being appointed by the mayor makes it harder for the school committee to really work independently and have strong oversight of the superintendent and of the schools.
This has been a news. We're talking with Alejandra St, candidate at large for Boston City Council. Alejandra, I want to ask you about one thing that makes you stand out also, is that you're the only candidate running at large I know of who's endorsed by Marty Walsh and by the person who many people say might be running against him someday, Michelle Wu. What should people take away from that?
Well, I was joking before and said I'm a bridge builder, but in all seriousness, relationships with both Marty Walsh, I worked under as the Director for Immigrant Advancement. We did a lot of great work in really pushing that office forward, really serving as a champion city for immigrants, and there's still so much more that we need to do, which is actually one of the reasons why I decided to run. And then Michelle Wu, who I have a long-term relationship with, she was my intern at one time when I was at OESTE, and we worked together also when she was on the council and I was in immigrant advancement. I think it really speaks to the fact that whether you agree with me on everything or not, and neither of them agree with me on everything, you know that I am a person of great integrity. I am a person who will always tell you where I stand and why, but will also listen as well. And I think both of them appreciate that and have endorsed me, seeing that they've both seen me in my work as advocate, both inside and outside of government, and they both appreciate that I could be a strong voice for the people of Boston.
I know a lot of candidates are worried about the lack of affordable housing and all the displacement that's going on. Yes. What about your ideas? What about rent control? What would you like to see? Yeah,
I support rent control. I think the first step would be to lift the ban for municipalities to be able to enact rent control. I support the luxury tax that Lydia Edwards is pushing. I also think we might have to start thinking bigger and bolder and thinking about capital investments that the city makes to be competitive on the private market and keep housing that's affordable, or make housing that's not affordable currently affordable. I mean, you look at people who, might have bought their house for $25,000, $30,000 30 or 40 years ago. Someone's offering them $1 million for them. You don't fault the homeowner for saying, okay, well, this is my retirement. But what you have to do is be able to compete in that market as a city and say, okay, we want to buy your house, but we want to keep it affordable the way it was affordable when you bought it.
What about the way decisions are made by the city about what gets built and how? Should there be some changes in that? Yeah,
I think that there definitely should be. I think that there could be more transparency in the system. I think that there could be, people aren't quite sure. I think one of the things that has been talked about is the fact that since our zoning laws are so old, that every developer needs a variance every time. And a developer or even homeowner really needs a variance to get anything done. And so that becomes much more difficult the less connected you are, the less money, the less time you have to be able to do that. And so I think in general, we need a much more broader planning process, plan for the city of Boston in general. And then part of that could be how we reforming how things get, how the zoning board is constructed and or composed, and then how are things getting built.
Now, of course, without having to ask for a variance, I guess the city wouldn't have much leverage over a developer if they wanted linkage money. So how would you deal with that?
Well, I think that, when I mean variance, it's like, having a setback and having, what are the different things that you have to choose in order to build. I would say that you build that into the actual codes itself. So you say, if you're building a unit this size, this is the amount that you need to put into the linkage. This is the amount you need for affordability. And if you don't have that, that goes into linkage. That being an automatic, I don't think that, we don't use variances as a leverage for that. I think that's something that you have the strong policy in place, and then that can be played out, whether they're applying for variances or not.
Finally, the city is moving toward raising the standard for what developers contribute for affordable housing. Yep. How much higher do you think that should go?
I mean, I think a reasonable increase is 20%. I think that, we have to be cognizant of the price of building in Boston, and we want to make sure that our builders are paying their workers well, that they are providing benefits, that, we understand that the land is expensive, and we understand that, materials are expensive. We certainly don't want them to cut back on the quality of the materials either as they're building, and there also has to be included in that stretch codes for climate resiliency. So understanding what the cost is to build and being cognizant of that, I still think 20% is not an unreasonable ask. Does that mean they make a little less profit? Yeah, of course. But that's okay. I'm okay with that.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Alejandra St. Guillen, candidate for City Councilor at Large.